Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining IBM Tech Exchange webinar. Before we start, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A box where you can start submitting your questions for our presenter today. Later today, you will receive a link to the on-demand recording and a link to IBM's community page where you can connect directly with our experts. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Ben.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our presentation today, all about App Connect Enterprise version 13. So with a bit of luck, you're now seeing a title chart stating that we can build integrations how you want, run them where you want, and connect to anything. So I'll be stepping us through an overview of the entirety of the version 13 release today. And we're also lucky enough to have Wayne Swales with us, who's the Senior Product Manager in charge of this offering, and he will be managing the questions that you pose during the live chat. Wayne, also please feel free to come off mute if you want to add anything as we go through. So if I just skip over a confidentiality chart, we may make a few comments about future-looking statements, but overall today, this is really about the generally available product release. So and we don't have to spend long on that one, and we can get straight into the important content. So where to begin? IBM is obviously a very big player in the area of integration. We've been a trusted partner, it says here, for more than 20 years. In fact, this year marks our 25th anniversary of the product that's gone by various different names in its history, most recently App Connect Enterprise, but we've also been known as IBM Integration Bus, WebSphere Message Broker, WebSphere Business Integration Message Broker. In fact, pretty much every combination of those kind of terms at some point during our lifetime. And we're very pleased to have made it 25 years, and we don't take that position for granted. We're very pleased to have had your support as customers during that time. And really, we see ourselves as a stateless routing and transformation engine that underpins some of the most important technologies that allow us to go about our daily business as part of our daily lives. And as you can see, there are some quite impressive statistics there that scene set the position that IBM has in market with our integration middleware. And that is, of course, in no short order down to some of the things that App Connect Enterprise has done over the years. So in terms of the version 13 release, we always like to talk about some themes. The themes this time around are all about greater productivity for all who use the product. Many folks will be familiar with the idea of our main developer tooling that we have. We aim that one at integration specialists. It's built on top of an Eclipse IDE environment, and it's been part of the product for many years. But this time around with version 13, we've also introduced a new authoring tool that we refer to as the Designer. And the Designer is aimed more at business technologists. It doesn't require any kind of coding involved, and we'll see some examples of how that operates in one of the demonstrations that we'll be doing today as we move through. We are obviously still very much a high-performance engine. We are a C-based runtime, and we actually run a JVM within our main operating system process as well. We run JavaScript as part of our Node.js part of our runtime, and even on Windows platforms, we run the .NET CLR there as well. So we've got a large number of different runtime technologies. They're all embedded into a single process, and high performance really is the order of the day when we're talking about the volume of transactions that ACE can deal with. The last sort of theme that we have here is around expansion of our connector catalog. Integration is a never-ending business. There are always new applications coming online that we'd want to interact with, and specifically these days, that's a stronger message than there has been before in this area regarding SaaS applications and their massive expansions. So we've obviously got a lot of new connectors to talk about in that area as well. I'm not going to leave this chart up for long. This is basically just to say that there has been a product announcement, and as part of that, we've mentioned some of the major new features, and we'll be diving into all of those details today. So I guess the short form of this presentation is just to read the words on the announce, but obviously you'll get a lot more out of today. We've actually got some very much live demos of the product, and some many more examples as we go through. So I won't dally any longer on that one, and we'll switch into a discussion about the product lifecycle. So ACE 13 is a major engineering release. We denote that by the increase in the number of the product, and we're still going to continue using the same kind of style of versioning that we've used for many years. We refer to that as VRMF, with the major version number 13, and then we have a release digit, a modification digit, and then finally a fix pack digit. And so that is 13.0.1.0 to use our full numbered title. And that product became available to download for existing entitled users from our Passport Advantage website on Friday of last week. So this is very much hot off the press and new to try out and download. In a moment, I'll also talk about a way of getting hold of the product if you haven't already purchased entitlement, and that's available too to download, but it's some slightly different instructions, so we'll get to that in a moment. For those that do purchase ACE 13, we follow the IBM standard support policy. And this may be new to some of our users. It's actually changed since we did our last major engineering release of version 12. And it now follows a pattern of 5 + 1 + 3. That's 5 years of standard support, an additional year for a fee of extended support for defect fixes and the like beyond that 5-year period, and then finally a 3-year period, which is more about Q&A style and existing defect support. We still have in market ACE version 12. That is distinctly midlife now in its lifespan, and we have the time period shown on the chart here. That one will still follow a 5 + 3 cycle, so it's only the new version that adopts the new style of numbering in terms of how long it's in support there. So we very much hope that those on version 12 look to migrate to ACE version 13. We have a very straightforward process, and again, we have a very quick demonstration of that later in today's talk. So we'll see how quick and simple that can be. There may be a few people still on ACE 11 or IRB version 10. Those releases are already in extended support part of their life cycle. So we really would encourage you to move up when convenient and take advantage of all of the great new features that have been added since 13 came out. So the first experience with the product, this is very similar to previous releases. We have on Windows a graphical installer. You can see some screenshots on the left-hand side for that installation. As part of the installer, you're given a few very basic decisions to make. You can choose the location where you'd like to install on disk. You can also choose to go and install our discovery connectors, which is an optional part of the install, but one that we'd prefer users to take. And then you can discover all of the greatest features that we have. On our Linux platforms, we have an unzip and go style installation. So you literally untar your zip file once you've downloaded it, and you take things from there. There is a command for accepting a license. And there's some further commands that we call the IBM int command family. That stands for IBM integration and is a command family that we introduced for simplicity when we got to version 12 of the product. And we've extended it in version 13 with some other new commands. A couple of examples of those commands are to display the mode of operation and set the mode of operation. And as you can see from the graphic on the right-hand side, we now name each of our modes of operation, or our editions, to use a different term, after the kind of environment that they're deployed into. So you have a production installation, one for non-production, whose purpose is for non-functional testing, including performance and scalability testing. We then have a development edition, which is there for doing functional testing, and it's entirely free of charge for you to put on a developer's laptop. You can have as many of those development editions installed as you like, and that doesn't matter one iota how many PVUs you purchased. You can still have an unlimited number of development environments. At the bottom of this chart, we also have Evaluation Edition. As the name suggests, the purpose of this edition is to evaluate the product. So you don't have to buy entitlement to try out Evaluation Edition, and that's accessible directly using an IBM ID to download it from our external MRS website. Again, there are links to these sites within our documentation if you've not used them before. So that's really the core about the new style of the product. For those that are existing users, I'll just mention very briefly that some of the editions have slightly changed their names since version 12. And we've really done this just to clarify the purpose of each one of those different editions. So I'm not going to go through the details on this chart, but just suffice to say that hopefully things are a little bit clearer than they were previously. That's been the reason for that, is to try and help with some of these naming conventions that we've applied to the product. So the non-production free, it's a bit of a mouthful in version 12, now becomes our development environment, because that was the purpose of the non-production free environment, and so on and so forth. You can see them outlined on the chart here. So leaving the additions to one side, let's talk about some of the new features. We have several enhancements to our main command interface that are used when you interact with the product. You can see from the blue arrows the wide variety of new commands that we've added. In particular, many of these are to do with managing your installation and securing your installation. We have some new settings that enable us to generate self-signed certificates by default as part of the installation when you lay AppConnect Enterprise into an install for the first time. You can switch off these settings if you prefer, but we think that should secure things out of the box a little bit better than we've done in previous versions of the product. We also have a large number of commands for interacting with our Vault technology. This is a built-in technology. It's part of AppConnect Enterprise itself, not to be confused with an external Vault provider, such as HashiCorp or other vendors are available, of course. This Vault technology is built into ACE and allows us to do symmetric encryption of the credentials that you need to provide to our product to enable us to easily interact with third-party systems and applications. Those credentials that you create are actually inserted into a Vault, and they can also be imported and exported, and you can also make changes to those credentials after you've initially defined them. One of the areas of the release that we don't have time to dive into the details of today relates to how those credentials can be changed and updated. And we're more dynamic in that regard these days. So when you display credential types, it's also possible to see which ones are defined to be static and which ones are defined to be dynamic, as in which can be updated without having to do a restart of the server in order to have those changes applied. So some nice little enhancements there for existing users who may have been annoyed in the past at having to restart the server when updating certain types of credentials. So leaving commands at that point, let's go to one of the major new parts of the release. I mentioned in my introduction that we now have a flow authoring tool that we refer to as the IBM AppConnect Enterprise Designer. Now, many folks within IBM Technologies kind of community may have used the Designer before, but as part of our public cloud offering for AppConnect Enterprise, which is offered on AWS. That was the original place that the Designer was offered, and then we ported that capability to also be available within our container-based offerings. But this version 13 release will be the first time that you can install the Designer tool directly onto your laptop. And we think this is an important aspect for users who have been used to using the software previously. The ability to run this on their local workstation for some of their use cases is a major advantage. It also means that there is no requirement for you to use a container technology in order to get up and running with Designer. So we haven't simply moved the containers across, we've actually embedded this as a pure part of the software installation. And in the video that we're about to see that describes the AppConnect Enterprise Designer's usage, you actually very briefly see that process being launched. And that's the process that then supports the use of this tool. So you're going to a local browser, pointing it at a port on your local machine, and having the pages served up to you there from that process. The screen grabs that I'm showing on the screen right now show you the first welcome page of the AppConnect Enterprise Designer. And the first thing that you'll be asked to do is to define the name of a vault key. The vault is used by the designer in order to store credentials safely using the technology that I mentioned a moment ago. And that part of the sequence has just been stripped off the beginning of the video that we're about to see, just for brevity. So I mention it here just in case you launch it for the first time and you wonder why it's asking you for a vault key. That's so that the designer can securely store those credentials. So in a moment, we'll queue up the video. This one should last us for about 5 minutes. You'll hear me commentating over the video in a recording, but it's recorded as live. So there are no sort of shortened sequences or anything like that. So at this stage, if I could ask our very handy helper to press play on the video, that would be fantastic. And then we'll switch back to me talking in just a moment. So this recording was made on a Windows machine where there's a new Start menu shortcut that launches what looks like a command console session, which is going to be hosting the backend process responsible for serving up the designer in your web browser, in our example on localhost port 7500. And we're just going to explore the various icons we have down the left-hand side of the web UI here. On the designer page, if you've created any flows previously, this is where they'll be shown. So we have a couple of pre-existing flows in this example. We're going to be creating a new one from scratch in just a moment. On the catalog page, we have a very large number of options for connecting to third-party applications. It's here that you typically fill out the credentials required for connecting to one of those third-party apps, and we've already done that for the sake of Salesforce and IBM Cloud that we'll be using for our example. On the logs page, we can see the various messages that relate to what the flows are actually doing once they've been created. But we're going to step through the whole process and actually create a new flow from scratch, which interacts with a cloud and database. So in this other tab that we have open in the browser here, we can inspect what that database structure looks like. There are multiple different JSON documents, each of which describes a different kind of a vegetable. A vegetable has an ID, which is its name, it has a color, and then it has a rating. And we're going to run a query against that backend Cloudant database using a flow for API that we're going to create within Designer. And the basis for creating any kind of flow for an API is to first of all create a model. And the model has a set of properties that represent the artifacts that we're going to be calling, the various resources we're going to be interacting with. In this example, we're just going to deal with a few very simple string fields. So we have the name, which is the ID of the vegetable. Then we have the color field and a rating field. And for each one of those resources that we've created, we can then provide an operation. In this particular case, we're going to implement the retrieve operation, and we're going to retrieve by ID. And that retrieve operation is going to be executed against Cloudant. So you can see here we've chosen an existing Cloudant connection. We're going to expand the option of all of the interactions with documents, and we're picking the retrieve document option. We're going to retrieve a single item, single row, single document in this example, and we're going to use a where clause to filter the particular document that we're interested in. So we're going to provide the name of the vegetable from the input message coming into the REST API, and we're going to use that as the document ID that we go off and retrieve from Cloudant. So we're now going to edit the flow and add a further toolbox node after the interaction with Cloudant. In this particular example, we're retrieving a JSON document from Cloudant, which could take many different forms. So what we're going to do here is use the JSON parser to parse the response that we've got back from the IBM Cloudant node. And the first one of these items is to take the document data, which could, of course, take various different forms. In our particular case, because we were looking at the database a moment ago, we can paste in here an example of the kind of JSON that we would expect to receive and use that to generate a schema. So you're not always lucky enough to have an existing JSON schema to describe your data, and the tool handily helps us with creating one from scratch. The last job we have in the flow is a mapping job, and we're using the JSON mapping experience that we have in front of us here to map what the fields should look like in the response message sent back to the original requester of this API. So we're passing back the color and the rating that have now been parsed using that JSON parser node that we were just looking at a moment ago. So we're mapping in there the tasty index field that's come in from the Cloudant database. And just before we test the flow, we're just going to rename the flow in the top left corner here. We can type in a new name. So this particular one we're going to label as Vegetables API 3, and then click the big button saying Test the API. And this enables us to put some test data through that flow that we've just created and see what it does. So switching to the Test tab, you can see in this case we've only got one operation. It's a get operation. And then we can use the Try It tab. If we zoom in slightly, we can then scroll down to find the fields that we have to provide as part of our input. And in this particular case, we've just got one field that we need to fill out, which is the name of the vegetable. It's the identifier that we were looking at in the database a moment ago. And when we send that data in, we get a successful response back, in this case showing us that tomatoes are both red and ketchupy. We can do one more example, and we can try to retrieve a cabbage, and the cabbage example here is somewhat cabbagey. And with that, we have our example. Okay, so I think we're now back onto the PowerPoint. So hopefully that was an informative first introduction to the AppConnect Enterprise Designer, seeing that for the first time in action. And one of the things that immediately jumps to mind when we mention the fact that there is this new authoring tool is, of course, the description of when we might want to use Designer and when we might prefer to use Toolkit, which has been with the product for a very long time. And there are some use cases that are possible to do with both technologies, but I think this chart should hopefully clarify the difference in role that we see between the two different alternatives for this style of tooling. The designer flows are really suitable, as we say here, for all users, and we want these to be very much accessible to those that don't necessarily have coding experience, that are not necessarily integration specialists. We often use the term within IBM called a business technologist. A business technologist may be aligned with a line of business, or they may be part of a centralized IT team, but typically they're looking for very high productivity tools without necessarily wanting to dive into code. So quick and easy flows is really the advert of the day as far as Designer is concerned. There are also some deeper technical differences between Designer and Toolkit. So when we read through the detail of the chart here, we can see that it's really about how well structured the data is as it passes through those flows. The Designer flow has the concept of JSON schemas underpinning it. these JSON schemas are recovered when we do the kind of discovery of connecting to third-party systems and grabbing those schemas back. And so because data is so well structured, it becomes very simple to achieve mapping tasks. We can provide that mapping experience to the user to very easily navigate through the tree structures that are presented as we go through the flow, node by node. The spreadsheet styling of JSON Arta should also help in this instance, because you're dealing with a target data structure in the same way that an Excel spreadsheet is, or other technologies are available, of course, for spreadsheets. But it should hopefully be very familiar, just as one of those standard tools that you'd use as part of your everyday work. There are also some use cases that Toolkit is capable of in functional terms, which you just simply cannot achieve with Designer. So Toolkit flows enable you to drop into code. We have a couple of different forms of Java code. You can also use XSL style sheets, and you can even use any one of the 40 .NET based coding languages as well, if you'd like to do that kind of extension. In a similar kind of vein, we also have very bespoke logic for creating message models within the toolkit. For many years, we've used what we call DFDL, data format description language, which is capable of modeling any form of data which is tagged or delimited or fixed length. In other words, not XML or JSON, but pretty much anything else, then DFDL is your chosen solution. There are also some changes when it comes to the ordering of the nodes in a flow. So in toolkit flows, you really can do pretty much anything. You can isolate particular branches of a flow, you can skip over nodes, you can do looping constructs, you can go into subflows inside separate files. So all kinds of different ways in which you can group your transformation logic that perhaps you wouldn't need in order to solve a very simple integration problem. But as a power tool, it really is adding something special there in the toolkit. Finally, worth mentioning that we still have in version 13 the unit testing framework that we introduced in version 12 and has proved very popular with our users of Toolkit. So if nobody's checked out that unit testing framework yet, I would very much encourage folks to give that one a go. Not new in v13, but definitely worthy of a look. So having done that sort of high-level comparison between the differences between Designer and Toolkit, let's also consider what is new in the Toolkit universe in the version 13 release. So the first and most obvious thing is that we have upgraded the level of Eclipse that we use. We're now at 4.31, which is very hot off the press. That only came out a few months ago, back in March of this calendar year. And as part of that upgrade, we also start moving to a Java 17 universe. So we have Java 17 as the core level of Java that is used to launch the toolkit. Once you're in the development environment, you can, of course, still create code and compile code for earlier versions of Java. But everything is essentially Java 17 by default as part of that v13 tooling experience. We also have the ability to create and connect to external directory vaults. So we mentioned our vault technology earlier on. We now have a new graphical way of doing that. And if time permits, we should see that in a video in a few charts' time. We also have many new discovery connectors, including one for AI, so that we can interact with what's next. And we have a new mapping experience too. So we've referred to JSON Arta, the mapping language that's primarily used under the covers by the mapping experience that you've seen within Designer. And we're also offering that same mapping experience as a node within an ACE Toolkit flow too. So again, good comparison of the various transformation technologies across the two authoring tools. Finally, on this chart, worth mentioning is we also have a rebranded patterns gallery. And we're going to talk more about patterns in due course, but there are 92 available with the general availability of version 13, and that enables you to create architectural solutions very rapidly. So we've mentioned connectors is an important part of integration, and we've been on a journey now. For those with good eyesight, you can see that stretches back over the last 18 months to 2 years, where every quarterly release, we provide connectors for new third-party systems. The rate at those have been increasing at have been somewhere between 15 and 30 per quarter, and ACE version 13 is no exception to that. We have a large number of new nodes that have been added along those lines. These particular nodes are typically classified as either input or request nodes, so they can be used to kick off a flow, or they can be used in the middle of a flow to interact with a third-party system. And what each of these connectors allows you to do is send synchronous requests against a wide variety of objects. So the objects themselves will depend on the SaaS system, but typically we have create, retrieve, update, and delete actions for each one of those objects. And when we connect to one of these third-party systems, we gather back from them all of the metadata that we need in order to make the experience of using these discovery connectors very streamlined. So in a moment, we'll see an example that utilizes some of those JSON schemas to do some further development work. On the chart here, we can see the newest discovery connectors. So we have 30 in total that have been added, and you can see that's been pretty much typical for the releases over the last few months. And of course, we still also have what we term our connector nodes. These are typically used with core transports. We've obviously got the traditional ones that have been with the product for many, many years, and we continue to enhance those as well. So, for example, folks may be familiar with the CDC node. The allows us to do change data capture that we're also very proud of in the version 12 product. We again have toolbox nodes, and toolbox nodes are sometimes sort of a grouping that are a bit more internally focused. So these enable you to do things like logging and error handling, grouping data together, and of course, transforming data as it passes through a flow. So lots of new capability in the area of being able to connect to other systems. I mentioned a moment ago that we've had quite a major revamp of our toolkit patterns. Patterns are a little gem of the product that is quite lesser known. And so we were keen to give it a little bit more airtime in the version 13 release. You can see on the chart that we really in the heyday of patterns, when we first created the ability to create a reusable solution as part of a pattern, and we were really focusing on that technology during the era of service-oriented architecture. So many of the older patterns in the product focused on web service style solutions. So what we've actually done is revamped and upgraded those and provided a large number of new patterns. Now, the purpose of a pattern is basically to allow the user to just give us some very key properties, some very key facts about how they want to integrate. And we can then generate dynamically an artifact that matches with those properties. So if you were looking to have a solution that, for example, takes you from one format of data to another, you could just very quickly and easily provide us the HTTP port that you wanted to listen on, the URL that you wanted to use, and perhaps the way in which you want to do that transformation. And then we would do the rest of the work for you. And this enables you to create very quickly some solutions. So they're very helpful for new users of the product, but they're also helpful for users who want to have some consistency in the way that they generate flows. So you can actually author your own patterns using AppConnect Enterprise, but as part of the built-in ones out of the box, we're trailing the use of some categories. You'll see that there are 5 categories shown on the chart here. The 2 on the left-hand side are offered at the time of GA, and the 3 on the right-hand side reflect our plans for increasing the number of patterns during the version 13 release. Because patterns are actually hosted publicly on GitHub, it also enables us to make those changes outside the standard release cycle of the product. So at any time we have the next set ready, they can just go live at any stage. This is obviously not intended for detailed reading, but what we have here in the gray text, the gray background, is the list of patterns that we've already made available, and the ones in blue are intentions for those new categories that I just referred to. So the first 2 major categories that have gone live are in the area of format transformation and protocol transformation. And we're going to see an example of the use of one of those format transformation patterns when we dive into our next demo. So if we could have the next video queued up, then I will be back in a few moments' time after that has played. Could we see the Toolkit patterns demo number 2, please? So here we are in the IBM AppConnect Enterprise Toolkit, where we'll be focusing on patterns in a moment. But from the welcome page here, we've also got a link to tutorials. So we're going to have a quick first look at tutorials and then switch to patterns. And you can see here the tutorials are used for some very simple scenarios just to get up and running with the toolkit for the first time. They've got a handy little search box. Every tutorial has been tagged with some keywords. And you can see here we can choose one of those tags such as JSON and then navigate to all of the JSON related tutorials. But we're going to go to patterns, and patterns are quite similar at first glance in the sense that you can search them using tags and you can also categorize them. In this example, we've got 5 different categories. We're actually using 2 of those categories at General Availability Data version 13, and the other 3 are provided for future expansion. And the one that we're looking at an example of here is a format transformation pattern, all to do with converting JSON documents into XML documents. And by clicking the Start button on a pattern, we then go off to public GitHub to our Open Technologies for Integration site, from where we source the installation of the pattern into the local toolkit. So we're just selecting a couple of boxes there to say, yes, we trust this content. And then the pattern is installed inside the toolkit, and in the Patterns Explorer view, you get a view of all of the different patterns that are available, which ones have been installed, and you'll see the one that we've just added at the very top of the dialog in the top left corner called JSON to XML. We have a Create New Instance button that we've just selected, and we're giving a name to an instance of the pattern that we're going to be creating. And this pattern instance records the answers to some very straightforward questions that we have about the kind of artifacts and resources that we're going to generate. You can see that some of these involve typing answers to string fields, to string questions. Other cases it involves selecting a button. In this particular case, on step 4, we can choose the kind of transformation node that we'd like to use within the pattern. We're going to choose compute node in this example, just to move away from the default and show how we can then generate a pattern instance that has a compute node inside of it. Having clicked the generate button, we're given an HTML page here that summarizes the solution that's just been created and gives some step-by-step instructions for how to then test that pattern instance out. So collapsing the projects there and expanding the other one, this is the actual application that's been generated. It's named after the instance name that we typed a moment ago, and within the application we have a message flow that is involving JSON to XML transformation. We can see a compute node has been generated, just like we asked for, and the purpose of the code inside this node is not just to switch the JSON message to XML, which is very straightforward, but then also to apply a namespace to each of the fields in the output. Before we can then see that in action, we need to have a test server that we're going to use where we can deploy the flow and try it out. So we're just creating a local test integration server within the toolkit here, and that takes a few seconds, and we get a success message to show that it's been created. And then we're going to use the recording button, the flow exerciser button at the top of the page there, in order to deploy the message flow that we've just got generated using the pattern, and we're told that it's ready to record. Now, alongside this pattern, we've also got some experimental data that's been provided. So we have a JSON message all ready to go as input, and this particular message represents a number of different people. So we have Joe Bloggs, we have John Doe, and we have a representative from Holland and another from Germany, more on the data structure in due course. And when we look at the dialog here, we can see what that JSON looked like that was sent into the message. Scrolling to the bottom, we see the various different stanzas relating to the different characters I was just describing. And then when we turn to the response message, we can then see the same kind of data, but represented in XML format. So here we've done the transformation successfully, and each field in the message has now been appended to with a namespace prefix. So this shows that the code that's been provided to loop over that structure and add namespaces has also been successful. We can see there Otto Normalverbraucher from Germany has been added in, and then when we click on the individual nodes in the flow and the wires between them, we can then see that data structure being altered as well. So that was the JSON structure, and we click on the terminal here, we can then also see the equivalent XML structure with the namespaces shown in the right column, and that concludes the demonstration.
Okay, so we've seen an example there of the toolkit patterns in action, which is one way to do development as part of the ACE version 13 toolkit experience. But we'd also like to step through another example, which is kind of from the ground up. So using a discovery connector in order to talk to a third-party application, and also giving us an opportunity to say a little bit about our external shared vault coverage within the toolkit as well. With no further PowerPoint in between, we'll just switch straight on to the next demonstration, which should take us about 6 minutes, and then I'll return to you with a little bit more information about some other features. So if we could roll video number 3, that would be fantastic, please.
So in the interest of time with this demonstration, we start from a flow that we've already constructed to contain a Salesforce request node, and we're looking at that node's properties. And you can see at the base of the dialog, we have a set of request properties, including some map inputs. And those map inputs can be furnished with the addition of a JSON schema. In this example, we've defined a very simple JSON schema to take the surname of a contact that we're going to use when we make an invocation against Salesforce. We're also going to create a test server that we'll be using later in the demonstration to actually try out the flow. And when we create a test server, you'll notice an option at the base of the dialog here to create what we call an external directory vault, which requires us to have a vault key.
This does symmetric encryption and is a very safe way of storing away credentials that are used when interacting with third-party systems. You can see the projects that have been generated for this local integration server and its associated vault. The success message shows that the server has been created, and if we look in the view in the bottom left corner, we can see that the external directory vault is there too. More on that later in the demonstration when we can interact with the credentials that have been put into that vault. But before we do so, we're going to launch Connector Discovery from the Salesforce node here and define the name of a policy project. A policy project will hold the policy definitions that tell the product how to interact with Salesforce, how to locate it, what its parameters are. When we launch the Connector Discovery process, we're going to connect live into the Salesforce system in order to query back information about how to interact with contacts within Salesforce. The first thing we need to do, though, is to teach the tool how to communicate with Salesforce. We need to say what we'd like to gather back. So we're going to do a retrieval of contacts, and then when we click the Connect button here, we would fill out the various parameters needed to successfully connect, including the login URL, the username and password, and so forth. With the magic of a video, I can speed over that step here, and you can see that I've filled out the various fields. So we've got 5 fields that have all been filled out there. And then when we click the Connect button, we can make a live connection to that Salesforce system, and if that's successful, the Save button will become active and we can save away that connection information. The next stage of discovery requires us to dictate the number of items we want to retrieve from Salesforce. In this case, we're only taking 1 item, and we're using this where clause to dictate which item we'd like to retrieve. In our case, we're searching for a contact whose last name matches a value of surname that has been passed into the HTTP input node at the beginning of our flow. By clicking the Save button, we've now saved that discovery session information and we can return back to the main toolkit. And here we can see, once we resave the message flow, that the red cross against the Salesforce node has now gone away, and we can start the job of configuring the next node in the flow. This is an example of a JSON map node, and that can also be furnished with example schemas. Because we have a schema from the Salesforce interaction, we can add that into the table of the map inputs here, and that can then be used when we do the configuration of the mapping itself. Storing away that information enables us to then click the Configure button that will launch into the mapping experience. And when that comes up, we can start to describe the way that the properties from the input schema should be mapped to the output schema. In this particular case, we're going to define what the output data structure looks like. We're not interested in much of the detail that comes back from Salesforce, but we're going to pick out a few key fields. So we have here the first name of our contact, the last name of our contact, and a description. And by clicking on the button, we can then edit those properties to receive mappings from our input data. In this particular case, we're going to be taking those map inputs from the data structure that was returned to us from Salesforce. So you can see the large number of fields in these drop-downs being reported as a result of us having done discovery against Salesforce. So we can just scroll through the list here, select the first name, select the last name, and the last one is quite a way down the description. So we're going to use the scroll bar here and go down to where we find a description of the contact. In this very rudimentary example, we're going to be looking at the description of some footballers who happen to be inside my Salesforce system as my contacts. When I click the Save button, that JSON mapping has now been saved away. We can dismiss the available dialogues, and then when we return to the message flow, if we hit the Save button, then the remaining red crosses go away on that flow, and we're in a position where we can begin to test out the flow. You'll notice here that the policy project has a policy inside of it, and when we refresh the view of the external directory vault in the bottom left corner, we now have the credentials that we filled in all about Salesforce when we were going through that discovery process. You can actually create credentials directly. It's not just through the discovery process. You can come in here and create your own bespoke credentials for interacting with third-party systems. All of the credential types are pre-coded, and the authorization methods for each of those endpoints is also known about in advance. We can deploy the policy project down into the integration server and then click the Record button, and this will deploy the message flow itself. When we agree to the dialogues, we'll be in a position of having deployed the flow in a ready-to-record state, and then we can inject some data that drives the message flow itself. We're going to add a new message here and type in a very simple query string which will involve the value of a surname. We're choosing Kane, and when we send that in, we will find out if there are any contacts in my Salesforce database, and there are in this example Harry Kane, who according to his description is a legend. You'll never guess which football team I'm a fan of. And with that, we can then see the passage of the data through the flow. We can click on an individual wire between the message flow nodes. In this example, we can see lots of information about Harry Kane, about his assistant, the Mr. Son Heung-min, and all of the various dates in which the records have been modified. At the very end of the flow, we can then see the final data structure where we've just got the 3 fields that have been created by the JSON auto mapping. And that concludes the demonstration.
Okay, so that's enough of our legend Harry Kane. Let's move on to something else that we hope to become legendary, our support in AppConnect Enterprise for different levels of Java. So perhaps not the most exciting topic, but certainly one of a lot of importance to a lot of users. So with base version 13, we have changed the default JRE version that we would be using to start up an integration server. So when we start an integration server for the first time, we have the option of using Java 17 or Java 1.8 with the latest version of the product. By default, we use Java 17. If you'd like to switch that to be Java 1.8, you may do so. We think most people will probably stick with our default, and we would certainly encourage that. But there are some functional reasons why you might want to hang around on Java 8 a little bit longer. The graphics shown on the right-hand side of the chart is just intended to inform users that we do know that some things are not yet quite compatible with the Java 17 universe. So specifically those folks who are using their flows to do WS security or WS trust, or if you're interacting with Tivoli Federated Identity Manager, using our global cache or using the Corba node, then that will require you to stick on Java 8 inside a single integration server for a while longer. I say a single integration server because you can configure each integration server to use a different version of Java if you prefer. For that reason, we hope that users have a lot of flexibility. So they may wish to take the items that are flows that still require Java 8 and run those all inside one integration server, or you might choose to keep your whole estate back on Java 1.8 a little bit longer if you prefer. Given the current timelines that Java 1.8 availability are still being negotiated and are still a little bit flexible, what we're expecting to pre-announce is the removal of Java 1.8 from support within the ACE 13 lifecycle. So we haven't yet declared that date for certain. It's currently looking like it's most likely to be somewhere in 2026. I say that in the interest of just full transparency. We're obviously still subject to change in those discussions, but that's our current expectation. And we will give plenty of time as forward notice of that. And so before that point, of course, we would like to sort out the issues where we still require Java 8 and enable those parts of the product either to move forward using alternate technology or get those up and running using Java 17. So more to come on those topics in due course. But for the moment, as you do your initial migration onto version 13 of ACE, some choices to be made, therefore, about whether or not you wish to adopt the very latest Java. And we know from customer pressures that we've already received that I think Java 17 will be quite popular as the default standard. But for those who are a little bit more cautious and might want to hang back on Java 1.8 a little while longer, that's also perfectly acceptable. So that's probably enough on Java. Moving on, we also want to talk a little bit about some new default security settings. I did mention this briefly earlier on, but just to reiterate, new in version 13, we actually have a machine-wide setting, which is giving us the automatic enablement of SSL when you are administering version 13 integration nodes and also integration servers. So by default, when version 13 of the product is installed, the configuration of the product for admin connections will be secured by SSL. And the way that's done is we generate some self-signed certificates by the product install itself, and then we refer to those when we're defining the administration port of the product.
Now, it could be that you're already using SSL. You may well have your own settings, your own CA, certificate authority generated certificates, that you'd like to continue using with a product. And of course, that's absolutely fine. So if you've previously set up your server conf YAML files in order to refer to your own certificates inside your own trust stores and key stores, then that's absolutely fine. Those settings will be respected moving forward. What you may also choose to do if you're operating in a development environment where you view the additional SSL of your admin security to be an inconvenience, if you would prefer, you can still turn off that new setting. And we have a very simple command for that. You've got an IBM int command to set admin SSL disabled, and you can carry that out as well if you prefer. In a very similar vein, we've also provided some capability that applies to HTTPS connectors as well. So when we listen for inbound HTTP traffic, we have the option of taking advantage of those new settings too, and a set of self-signed certificates there as well. Those ones are a little bit less kind of defaulted for the user, although we generate those certificates by default. When you create a flow for the first time, many of our existing users may be aware on an HTTP input node, there is a little box that you can tick to say whether or not you would like to secure that inbound communication using HTTPS. So if you have not ticked that box, which is the default from prior versions of the product and has not changed, then we will still respect that when that flow is deployed. So that's a summary of those default security settings, and I realize not the most interesting of topics, but an important one nevertheless, particularly given that we want to kind of finish up today with a little bit of a discussion about migration. So as you would expect, migration is a very important topic for AppConnect Enterprise. Many of our users have come from earlier versions. And so hopefully the chart, the picture here, should be relatively familiar to folks. This basically describes the process that we think most people will follow when moving from an older version of the product. We have the MQSI backup broker command, rather anciently named, but has been around for a very long time with the product on many earlier releases. And the function of that command is quite clear. It generates you a zip file with a backup of all of the configuration details about what is deployed into your integration nodes. You can then run a command, and we have the IBM int extract node command to take out a whole node, or an IBM int extract server command to take out the definitions of a single server from that backup zip file. This is very similar in concept to the MQSI extract components command that we had previously. Apologies, the screen share suddenly has gone crazy on me. I'm not sure who's controlling that. I'm just going to flip back to the later chart. So apologies, that one went a bit AWOL for a moment. Not sure what was happening in our system there. So yes, you run the IBM int extract command in order to do that, which is slightly different to the MQSI extract components command, which we've previously used. Now we're aligned on that new IBM int command family. And we're going to see an example of that in a little video in just a moment's time. There are some additional notes, which again, for the sake of time today, I'm not going to go through in detail, but they say very much what you might expect at this point. We're still encouraging users to adopt the use of our credential vault. You can still continue to use MQSI set DB palms. I think there may have been a question on that fly past in the chat earlier on, so you can certainly still use MQSI set DB palms. At some point, we will forcefully migrate users onto the Vault, but that's not coming in this release, so you can still maintain that older technology for a while longer if you wish. We're still encouraging you to adopt DFDL in preference to MRM. And of course, for anybody who has not yet embraced applications and libraries, I smile at this point, a wry smile. Applications and libraries have been around now since around about 2011. So not really new technology these days. But if you haven't yet had the opportunity to convert your resources, then please do check out the tools that have been available in Toolkit to help you with that for a very long time now. So that's probably enough on the concept. Let's actually see that in action. So we've got one final short demo video for today, which should take us about 3 minutes, and then I'll come back for some closing comments. And yeah, if we could queue up the next video on migration, then we'll see some of what I just described in action. So yeah, if we could play that last video, demo number 4, please. So here we have actually quite a quick demonstration showing the concept of how we can very easily migrate information between AppConnect Enterprise version 12 and AppConnect Enterprise version 13. And on the screen in front of us, we can see we have a couple of Command Console windows already open. In the top one, we can look at the version of the product that's involved here. It actually happens to be 12.0.12.0. And if we run an MQSI list command on this particular installation, we can see we've actually got quite a large number of integration nodes. This one in particular has been exposed on an HTTP administration port 4453. And if we do a listing of my node, we can see what it contains. And my node in this example actually has 3 different integration servers. Server 2 and Server 3 don't actually have anything deployed to them right now, but inside my Server 1 we have an example of a single application containing a message flow. So having executed the stop command against that integration node, we're then going to use the MQSI backup broker command that's been with the product for a very long time, whose purpose is to generate a zip file that can be saved to disk on the local file system. We're nominating a directory there, and if we look at the base of the screen, we can see that the zip file has been written to my local temp directory in a subdirectory called migration demo. And what we're going to do next is actually switch to the other window that's on screen right now. In fact, if we make that a little bit larger, we can stretch it up to the top of the screen. And then in this console window, we'll be interacting with version 13. It's installed on the same physical server here. And again, we can run the MQSI service command just to prove the version of the product that we're interacting with in this second window. And the purpose of what we're going to run next is to take the definitions inside that zip file and then use another command that we call the IBM int extract node command. This precise form of the command is actually new in version 13. Previously, it was been called the MQSI extract components command. And the parameters that we pass into the IBM int extract node command include the backup file on disk, so we're just typing in the name of that zip file that we generated a moment ago. And then there are another couple of parameters. One is dictating the name of the input integration node that we're migrating from, which in this example is called my node, and also the name of the output integration node that we'd like to generate. You can rename a node as part of this process, so we're choosing to call it my node migrated. And you can see from the feedback on the command line there that it has successfully loaded the configuration from that zip file. And in the case of server 2 and 3, it's not needing a JVM, it's giving us that piece of feedback there. And then a very straightforward command to actually start up the integration node, and we'll be up and running with the newly migrated node. Now, as part of version 13's installation, by default we generate some certificates which are actually self-signed, which can be used to secure the administration port of version 13. So when we go back to our web browser and we change in the address bar to go back to the same localhost, same port 4453 that we started on, we'll notice that to begin with we're unsuccessful in getting administrative control until we change that URL task there to note the fact that we want to use secure HTTPS in order to talk to the integration node. And then we're up and running, and we can navigate down into the server, and we can see that the JSON application has been migrated successfully, including the flow inside there too. And that concludes a simple demonstration of the process of migration.
Okay, welcome back after our whistle-stop tour through migration. Hopefully that sets some minds at rest for folks who may have used previous versions. I really would encourage everybody to check out version 13 and to start thinking about how to migrate existing estates onto the new version of the product. Hopefully very straightforward and also very familiar to folks who have used our migration tools in the past. We're almost at the end of today's time, but before we go, we just wanted to make a quick future-looking statement and really one of reassurance. Many folks will obviously have seen with interest the recent acquisition of Web Methods, and naturally when these sorts of things occur, there can be some nervousness in the market. So I really just wanted to add a message today that hopefully the fact that we have new versions of all of these technologies available, hopefully that will continue to reassure everybody that they're both very much front and center of our thinking as we move forward. So your existing solutions are here to stay, and we're committed to delivering ongoing updates and innovations. So the standard kind of process that you'll be familiar with from an AppConnect Enterprise point of view, with quarterly updates of both new functions and also maintenance, is exactly what we expect. We've also got some very exciting news that we might expect towards the end of this calendar year. And for those folks that are interested in finding out more about that, please join our early experience programs, where we'll be talking about the longer term directions and trends in the area of the iPaaS. Before I leave you, another couple of kind of administration points. Help us to make AppConnect Enterprise better. We are never complacent about the capability of the product. We always want to do more. There's always a note of disappointment that there weren't other things that we didn't get around to as part of the new release. So please don't be shy to let us know, and there's lots of channels available for that. We have our early experience program that you can become a member of. You can join us in Hursley during the summertime for our on-site workshop and lab exercises. And of course, you can also leave us a review. We especially like good reviews, but we like reviews nonetheless. So for those members of the IBM community that we're talking about today, obviously as part of the IBM community presentation, there is an advantage of a bonus that you can exploit here too. With that, I think we come to the end of our time today. I noticed I've got about 4 minutes on the clock, but I have seen that I think the vast majority of questions have been answered by my very able assistants in the background, scurrying away, getting smoke rising off their keyboards. So thank you very much for the assistance there, guys, on answering those. If there aren't any that we haven't managed to get around to, then of course we will get in touch and try and furnish better answers or direct conversations where required. But given where we're at with the timing, I think it's probably best at this stage that rather than take anybody off a microphone or attempt to do anything further there, I will simply say thank you very much for spending the time with us today. We really do appreciate it. We really do appreciate your interest in version 13, and hopefully we'll see you around sometime soon at one of our events where we can discuss the new technology in more detail. But until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.